I always tell this as a cautionary tale that has actually happened to me, especially in light of all the terrifying, heartbreaking news stories of girls who get into Ubers and are just never seen again. So this happened when I was in college. It's one of the bigger party schools with an entire street of bars you can wander to and from. My boyfriend, and now fiancé, had gone back to his hometown for the weekend, so I decided to go out with some friends. I'm sure you can see where this is going, but I had a bit too much to drink and was on the edge of blacking out. Knowing with my whole mind, body and soul, though, that I did not want to become a liability for my friends for the rest of the night, I told them that I was just going to catch an Uber home. My friends insisted on coming home with me, but selfishly, I wanted to call my boyfriend when I got home and have a bed to myself, so I told them all no, but took a screenshot of my driver's name and info on the app and sent it to them. When he got close, I hugged them all and I walked out the door. Like I said earlier, it's a pretty big party school with lots of bars in one area, so the entire strip is lined with Ubers from about 11 p.m. to 3, I'd say. It was almost bar close anyway, so there were a ton, and look, I was hammered. I don't even know what a Toyota Yaris looks like at the best of times too. So, as I'm searching, a man rolled his window down and asked if I was waiting for an Uber. I said yes. He told me that he wasn't my Uber, but if I cancelled my ride and accepted his, then he would take me home. I was already thinking of the leftovers that I had in the fridge at this point, so I just agreed, cancelled my Uber, and linked my account up with his. He was super nice, and he was an Uber. I've heard stories of fake Uber drivers, so I did make sure that he was legit. He called me beautiful a few times right off the bat, but hey, I was a girl in college, and I got that a lot. I remember talking about our favourite books. I told him that I was an English major, and he was super interested in listening to me talk about tutoring ESL students in my free time on campus. He was an immigrant who had to learn to speak English, so we lamented about how awful it was to learn such an intricate language, but how rewarding the successes were in the end. And when he missed the turn-in for my apartment complex, I figured it must have been because he was distracted by our conversation. I politely pointed out that he missed the turn-in, and he said that he'd turn back around. Rather than making a U-turn, though, he took the longest way back to my apartment. I was still in familiar territory, though, so I at least knew that he was going in the right direction, but I was starting to get a little bit nervous, I must admit. It was around 2:30 at this time, and it was super dark, and no one was awake, let alone outside. When he missed the turn-in again, though, I asked if I could just get out and make it back on my own. He seemed kind of offended by this, like he was surprised that I wasn't as engrossed in our conversation as he was. I kind of jokingly told him that I was a broke college student and he was racking up my bill during a search. That seemed to straighten things out a bit, and he was all, "Oh, I completely understand," and turned back toward my complex. I was honestly so freaked out and drunk at this point that as soon as he pulled into my complex, I was like, "Okay, right here is fine, thank you," and pulled on the door handle when he came to a stop. But it didn't open. I hit the little lock latch and still nothing. And then he said, "Let's go get a coffee." He clicked the button in the app to say the trip was completed and clicked out of the app. At this point, I'm just trying not to look as freaked out as I feel, and I told him that I was tired and it was late and coffee was the last thing I needed at that moment. I tried the door again, just to make sure I wasn't drunk and handling the door wrong, but still it didn't open. "We should just sit here and talk until you're feeling better," he was explaining to me. "We can go somewhere more private too, if you'd like. Do you live alone up there?" At this point, I'm frantically digging through my purse for my phone, screw being polite. When he asked what I was doing, I told him that I promised my boyfriend that I'd call him once I was home safely. And that was the wrong thing to say. He got pissed that I had a boyfriend and I didn't tell him about it. He asked what his name was and what he did for a living and where he was right now at this very second. When I gave a half-hearted answer, he got even angrier too. He demanded to know why a boyfriend of mine would be so stupid enough to leave his girl alone with another man, him. He repeated it twice too, and at this point, I'm just trying not to cry. When I figured my phone must have fallen under the seat, I started digging around down there and he demanded to know what I was doing. I gave my best impression of a genuine laugh and said that I dropped my phone. He told me to stop digging around though in these things immediately, and I stopped. Mind you, I'm still drunk as hell at this point. I was just trying to keep my crap together and not vomit or pass out. I tried the door a third time too, but still nothing. He asked if I wanted to get coffee again, even kind of begged a little, and I told him no, I just needed sleep. He asked if I lived alone again, and I lied and told him that I had a roommate. He asked if it was my boyfriend, and I said no. He kind of got angry again, and then straight up asked if I made my boyfriend up. I told him no, and he got angrier, and again asked why he would leave me alone with another man like this. Now, I'm usually pretty good at reading people, and I got the vibe that this guy thought that he was a knight compared to my boyfriend or something. So, I lied through my teeth. I told him that I was going to break things off with my boyfriend, that we weren't even really that serious, that he was an idiot to leave me alone like this. And thank whatever God was watching over me, but that did it. He calmed down at that and said that that changed things. He asked if I wanted to get coffee again, and I changed my answer to not tonight. He asked for my number, and I gave it to him. He called to make sure it was my real number too. My phone buzzed from between my seat and the door, and I fished it out. He grabbed my phone from me and demanded that I show him my boyfriend's contact info. When I did, he deleted it and gave me a big smile. Feels good, doesn't it? I told him yes. He put his number into my phone and gave it back. I told him goodnight in the hopes that he would just release me, and he told me that he'd like to talk for just a little longer. And I had to stay locked in that car with him until 4:30 in the morning. I honestly don't even remember what we talked about. He asked if he could hold my hand at one point, to which I said I needed to break up with my boyfriend before I did anything with another man. And he seemed to like that answer, thankfully. When he finally did let me out, the door was a child lock, so it could only be opened from the outside, and the windows were locked too. I walked up the wrong building steps and crouched down in the shadows of some random person's door until he drove off. I sat for another 10 minutes, and then I just sprinted to my apartment. After crying on the floor in my kitchen for a while, I called my boyfriend and explained to him what happened. His response was the one that I get from everyone when I tell this story: report the guy to Uber. But even though he didn't know which building in my complex I lived in, he still knew where I lived, and I was terrified of seeing him again. I was terrified of calling an Uber, and to this day, I refuse to Uber alone, and I make sure that I have my phone in my hand every time I get into an Uber now. I realize that this could have been a lot worse, and who knows, maybe he was a good guy with the wrong line of thinking, and he did actually mean well. But I was terrified that I wasn't going to make it to my apartment that night. So please, be cautious when getting an Uber, and don't be like me. This happened in the mid to late 80s. I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old at the time, and it was summertime, and my mother and I were at my grandmother's house in St. Albans, Queens, for a barbecue. Like most houses in this area, my grandmother's house was fairly close to her neighbours. It's mid-afternoon, and the adults had all been drinking for a few hours and were laughing about things that I was just too young to understand. I was sitting in the backyard playing with my Transformer toys when something in the second-floor window of the neighbour's home caught my eye. It was a hand puppet. But at the time, the Muppets were so popular that I thought any sort of puppet was a Muppet. Anyway, the puppet began to move and wave at me, and I laughed and asked my mother to look at the window. She and the other adults looked and began to laugh and yelled at the window, "You still play with those dolls, Larry?" I only say his name was Larry because I can't for the life of me remember the name that they called him. Larry then came into view in the window, and the Muppet was obviously on his right hand. Looking back on it, he was probably in his early 30s or late 20s, I'd say, considering my mum and uncles knew him too. He waved at everyone, and then just walked out of view. Now, at that age, I thought that any adult that played with toys or video games was really cool, but I'd never seen one who had a Muppet. I figured that he was a ventriloquist and was excited at the idea of him coming outside with a puppet and doing a show for us. The barbecue went on, and I kept glancing at the window, hoping to get another look at the puppet. But I guess Larry had put on enough of a show for one day. The barbecue proceeded as usual, and by the evening people were beginning to leave while others went to get more alcohol. My mother told me that we were staying at Grandma's tonight because she didn't want to drive home. I began to feel tired, so I went down into the basement to get into the pull-out bed that I slept in when we stayed overnight. The basement had several rectangular-shaped windows that were placed right below the basement ceiling. My cousins and I liked to look out these windows, so we had to climb on furniture, and because the windows were so low to the ground on the outside, we could spy on what was happening around the house without being detected. I turned off all the lights in the basement and climbed into bed. The adults all seemed to be upstairs in the kitchen and the living room, and once I heard music playing, I knew it was going to be one of those nights. I was in bed and nearly asleep when, in my peripheral vision, I detected something outside the basement window, across from me, peering down at me. Once my eyes adjusted a bit, I could make out the white and bulbous-shaped eyes right above an unnatural wide smile. I was obviously petrified, but after a few seconds I realized that this was the Muppet from earlier in the day. This didn't exactly give me any sense of relief, because now I'm trying to determine how the hell the Muppet from the neighbour's house got outside and was looking into my grandma's window. My uncles were at the barbecue, and they actually took delight in running these kinds of jokes on me, so I figured one of them got the Muppet from Larry and was trying to scare the crap out of me. And just as I was about to go upstairs to get my mum, the damn thing tapped the window. And the same smile and unblinking eyes staring at me. But now its three-fingered cartoonish hand was tapping the window, resulting in a sort of muffled thud, and it was really creepy. I'll admit that when I initially saw this thing staring down at me, I was too scared to move, but once it started tapping the glass, my instinct to scream for my mother kicked way in. I opened my mouth, and just as I was about to scream with everything that I had, Larry came into view out of the corner of the window. He must have been laying down on the driveway with the puppet on his hand, and he put a finger to his lip indicating for me to be quiet and gestured for me to come outside with his left hand. This was so freaky, and any notion of Larry being a cool guy was now way out the window. I got out of bed and was walking upstairs to find my mum or grandmother, whichever was less intoxicated. I looked back at the window prior to ascending the stairs, and both the puppet and Larry were just staring at me. That frozen smile on the puppet and the eerie look of excitement on Larry's face still unnerves me to this day. So I ran upstairs and found my mother going through records looking for something to play. When my mother was drinking, she could be in any number of moods. I didn't know whether she'd be annoyed at me or make me dance with her to whatever song was playing. Thankfully, she wasn't quite drunk yet and heard what I had to say. After I finished telling her what happened, she told me to stay in the living room while she took a look outside. She got one of my uncles to go with her, and they both left out the back door. Several minutes passed, and neither one came back inside. I went to the door and heard my mother and uncle talking. I cracked the door open and saw that they were smoking cigarettes, and I said, "Hey, Mum," in a way that only a kid can when he or she wants something but is afraid to annoy their parent. And she said, "Baby," with a very short response of, "There's no one out there. You must have imagined it." I asked if I could sleep upstairs in my aunt's room, and my mother said that I could that night. As I closed the door, I heard my uncle ask if I had a bad dream, and my mum responded that I always want attention when she's with people. And that was my cue that she was annoyed and I had best not bother her any more tonight. So I went upstairs to my aunt's room, which was actually a large closet that had been converted into a small bedroom, and I got under the covers praying that Larry didn't come to get me. Thankfully, there were no windows in that room. So the years passed, and every time I was at my grandma's, I'd glance at the neighbour's window for any sign of that Muppet. About a decade later, I was at my grandmother's house helping her to do chores when I asked her about the guy next door with the puppet. She responded with who? And I asked, "You don't remember the guy next door that had the puppet in the window that one day?" She thought for a while before saying, "Oh yeah, Larry. He hasn't been here in a long time. He got in trouble for doing something to his younger cousin, and he moved down south. And I was suddenly that scared little boy, lying in bed in my grandmother's basement, staring at two sets of eyes, staring at me, wondering what the hell would have happened had I gone outside that night. Thankfully, I'll never know.